Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General has issued another report on the FBI and a high-profile case. That would be the case of former USA Gymnastics team doctor Larry Nassar, who was convicted of sexually assaulting and abusing hundreds of young women during his time with U.S. Gymnastics team.
Yeah, and big names, too. Simone Biles, among others.
Made into a movie. Sentenced to 300 years in prison. The DOJ Inspector General finding, I'm quoting here, senior officials in the FBI Indianapolis field office failed to respond to allegations of sexual abuse of athletes by former physician Lawrence Gerard Nassar with the urgency that the allegations required. We also found that the FBI Indianapolis field office made fundamental errors when it did not respond to the allegations, failed to notify the appropriate field office, FBI field office, or state or local authorities of the allegations, and failed to take other steps to mitigate the ongoing threat posed by Nassar. For 6 weeks after the accusations began to pile up, the Indianapolis field office conducted what the report called, quote-unquote, limited follow-up, reviewing the thumb drive, calling one of the 3 athletes they knew had been assaulted, did not formally document any of its investigation, nor did it conduct further investigation. I mean, honestly, this FBI, no wonder it's taking so long to figure out whether Hunter Biden is in violation of simple tax laws with respect to his overseas largesse. This FBI, under Comey and Wray now, and perhaps going back further than that, I mean, I get the distinction that you're compelled to make between the senior leadership and the field agents, and I'm happy to make that distinction with respect to the majority of those who work for the FBI who are law and order types and are not political hacks, but a fish rots from the head down, and that seems to be what's happening with the FBI. Forget even the politics of it, just the competency level. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Adam Mill, an attorney specializing in labor and employment and public administration law. He's a contributor to the Federalist, American Greatness, and the Daily Caller as well. Adam, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Dan and Amy, thanks so much. It's so great to be with you again.
Now, I mean, you can't set it aside, but you just sort of include this Larry Nassar deal with the Russian collusion business and the spying and the general politicization of the office under Comey, and to, I guess, continuing to some extent, continuing with Christopher Wray. And it's tough to have a lot of faith in what the FBI has to say these days.
Dan, I will see your Nassar scandal, and I will raise you. There was just another OIG report back to June. It was totally overlooked, but it's really horrible. In February of 2021, the U.S. Department of Justice and the OIG and the state police in Louisiana received a complaint regarding an agent in Louisiana. And it turns out that this guy had been conducting multiple criminal acts, this FBI agent, as far back as 2016. And these are both adult and juvenile victims. So he had this crime spree of preying on vulnerable children and adults right there in Louisiana as an active duty agent. And the FBI, I either looked the other way or wasn't able to find a sexual predator within their own ranks as far back as 2016. So it really came as no surprise that this Larry Nassar thing is, reminds us of the same failure to act. And it kind of also reminds me that in some of the worst police states in the world, like Venezuela, Cuba, the crime rates are also very, very high. And it's because the police just don't seem to be very focused on actual crime. They're more about protecting the regime and keeping the regime in power, protecting their own power, enriching their people. I wrote an article about how the FBI has this kind of side hustle with this consulting firm called Tuva, and highly placed FBI agents retire. They can come back to work for this contractor, and then make these huge consulting fees. And the DOJ did another report fact that contract was not being properly supervised, that these payments were not properly accounted for, that they weren't doing performance reviews of the work, whatever work they actually did, which, I think if you read the report, it's pretty clear that on some of these task orders, on some of these payments, they can't actually show that any work was done at all.
Yeah, but here's the thing. All these inspector general reports, they just become fodder for congressional hearings where and for a one-day news cycle, and then nobody's ever held to account for anything. And this is the fault of the Republicans too, because everybody has to do like the perfunctory genuflecting before law enforcement and so on and so forth. That's fine. Oh, so stipulated. But now let's get to the focus here and let's get to some resolution. It's not just that. It's with January 6th too. We still have questions about exactly what the FBI was doing with January 6th. Did they have confidential informants? Did they have undercover FBI agents? What did they know? When did they know it? What did they communicate to local authorities? What did the sergeants at arms communicate to the leaders of the respective chambers? We have this smoking gun Lego set that was found at some guy's house that was charged in connection with 1-6. That turns out now that they're denying there was any essentially Lego set that was supposed to be some model of the Capitol. Yeah. What the hell with respect to this agency? And this comes out of the big bad era of J. Edgar Hoover, particularly at the end with the enemies list and so forth. And yet all of that Woodward and Bernstein era concern about big government and spying and law enforcement agencies that operate above the law, that's all by the boards now.
Yeah, and there was another article, Tucker Carlson highlighted this last Friday, that, I think just we've kind of passed this point where the FBI and a lot of these kind of administrative state powers are capable of being embarrassed. And, in Tucker Carlson's piece, he talked about the Hunter laptop, the decision to not prosecute or investigate the Hunter Biden laptop scandal, which, is just, you got a lot going on there. You can set aside the fact that he probably violated federal weapons charges and the drugs and the prostitution. There's a real concern about the fact that he was essentially, brokering his father's influence by taking payments for these, dummy transactions. Before he was working in a consulting firm where he had no expertise. Now he's selling paintings. Have you heard about this?
Yeah.
He's selling paintings for $500,000.
Yeah.
Like one of his paintings is now more expensive than a Picasso painting.
And he has no training in art.
Well, he's a natural. He's got the eye, and the apparently the straw.
And
a
dad who's president.
Yeah, am I the only one who's noticed? Am I the only one who's noticed that he's bent over a table with a straw in his face while he's painting?
Yeah,
the irony is lost on him.
Yes.
Yes.
Nothing to see here.
Yeah. Apparently, no, it's true, but but Hunter Biden, and how he compromised the administration and how he's just a general public embarrassment. That's one thing, but these institutions that exist from administration to administration, and they're either furthering American principles with the way they conduct themselves, or they're undermining them. And I think your point, including your recent piece at amgreatness.com, is that they're undermining American principles. Forget their own legitimacy by delegitimizing themselves. They're also undermining things like the rule of law and thus the American experiment.
Right, and the Political's point, the article, the point I meant to make about the Political article is that the Political was congratulating the U.S. attorney for responding to a request from the Biden campaign to not prosecute, and they called it an example of sober prosecutorial judgment. But I think the point here is that they've moved on from the point of thinking about the law as something that applies equally to both sides, and they don't feel embarrassed by saying no, the law is a tool, it's a weapon, and it's in our hands, and we're going to use it, and we're not going to put it away to be fair to the other side. And they just think that their ends are so important that the law has become just a means to do that, and they don't seem to understand that there's this whole other tier of America that looks on the way the law is being administered now, and they're thinking, well, that's not fair.
And if and when Republicans are ever put in charge of anything again, Congress and or the presidency, I mean, if there's, it's she's like, oh, we give them one more chance, and people are cynical about giving them one more chance. But what else can we do? If they don't do something about NSA, about how the CIA operates and has operated during the Trump administration, and the same thing with Department of Justice and FBI, then, you're just facilitating the unraveling of America, because if people don't have confidence in the rule of law, then, you don't have a free society.
Yeah, but I am a little bit more optimistic than you are in one sense, and this is the point of the article I just wrote, which is, conservatives are ticked off. They've been ticked off for a while. They've been screaming at the top of their lungs about how unfair everything is. But this is different. What's happening now is that people who are not political have been harmed by this kind of leftist movement, this total takeover. And, you mentioned CRT, I think, earlier in your show. The fact that they're having to explain CRT, the fact that families are starting to flock to these school board meetings to demand that instead of schools teaching CRT, teach racial blindness, teach equality before the law. But CRT doesn't advocate those things. And so parents are getting involved. They're getting involved in the school closures. Businesses are starting to fight back about these COVID restrictions. And a lot of people, there are a lot of corporations that have lost a lot of money because of all these restrictions. And I think that people are starting to realize that they can't just tune out and kind of, put a sign in their front yard and forget about the politics, because it's starting to hit people where they live, people who are not conservatives.
Meanwhile, no lessons learned from Joe Obama terms 1 and 2. We have the IRS and the press colluding again to target people for political reasons, with obviously the release of tax returns that were illegally obtained for the purposes of raising taxes on the rich, quote unquote. Just the same way people were targeted in Joe Obama terms 1 and 2 for their political and religious beliefs with respect to C3 designation. So, it's not like they're learning any lessons, and that must mean they don't feel chastened by the response to date.
No, they don't. And they don't even see it as like a bug in what they're doing. They believe that their cause is so righteous that anything done to advance that cause, regardless of what rules have to be bent, broken, or taking advantage of the legal system in a way that they're not willing to live under the same rules that they're imposing. I think a good example is this thing with the Trump organization being indicted for not paying taxes on these corporate perks. Now, I completely agree that these corporate officers should pay taxes on their perks where it's appropriate under the IRS guidelines. I just question whether this rule is being applied equally, regardless of politics.
Of course. It's not even a question. That's a matter that's, administratively settled with fines in 99.9% of cases. Yeah, I wonder why this is the exception. Adam Mill, attorney specializing in labor, employment, and public administration law, contributor to the Federalist, Am Greatness, and the Daily Caller as well. Adam, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great week.
Thanks. You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Agents prepare policies, but at Heil & Heil, we deliver great rates with expert personalized service for home, auto, business, and life. Get a free no-obligation review of your current policy today at heilandheil.com. That's HEIL.